Patrick Swayze was never just another Hollywood name. He was the man who danced his way into millions of hearts, the man who made love stories feel real, and the man who smiled even when life gave him reasons to break. But behind the charm and the strength was someone quietly fighting a battle that no audience could see. His final words, spoken in the softest whisper, carried more weight than all the applause he ever received because they revealed who Patrick truly was when the spotlight faded. In early 2008, Patrick Swayze's world changed forever. At 55 years old, he was still at the peak of his craft, respected, admired, and seemingly unstoppable. He had just completed filming the pilot episode of The Beast, a gritty television drama where he portrayed an FBI agent willing to bend the rules for justice. It was a role that reminded everyone of his raw intensity, a mix of toughness and soul that had defined his career. But behind that trademark smile and steady presence, something inside him had begun to betray him. It started as a dull ache in his stomach, the kind of discomfort most people would brush off as exhaustion or indigestion, but the pain refused to go away. It worsened during filming, sometimes leaving him doubled over between takes. Friends urged him to see a doctor, and when he finally did, the diagnosis was devastating: pancreatic cancer, one of the deadliest diseases known to medicine. When doctors delivered the news, they also told him what few people can ever truly prepare for. The cancer had already spread, and his chances of survival were slim, 6 months to 2 years at best. For a man known for his physical strength, discipline, and energy, it felt surreal. But Patrick didn't react the way most might have. His wife, Lisa Nimi, who was with him during that appointment, later said that he didn't cry or rage. He just sat quietly, taking it in, and nodded. It wasn't denial. It was acceptance wrapped in strength. That same day, he began discussing treatment options and agreed to start chemotherapy immediately. He also volunteered for an experimental drug trial involving vadalinib, a compound designed to block the blood vessels feeding his tumor. But privacy in Hollywood is rare, and within days, the news leaked to the press. By January 2008, tabloids were running headlines predicting his death. Photos of a thinner, tired-looking Swayze spread across magazines. Yet in every interview he remained composed. "I'm not finished," he said firmly. "I have a lot more living to do." While many might have retreated from the public eye, Patrick did the opposite. He continued to work, determined to complete The Beast. Even when the pain intensified, he refused to let it stop him. "I'm a miracle," he told Barbara Walters in 2009. "I'm not giving up without a fight." And in that moment, the world saw what kind of man he truly was, not just a star, but a fighter with an unbreakable spirit. When Patrick Swayze returned to the set of The Beast in late 2008, the cast and crew couldn't believe what they were seeing. He was thinner, paler, and clearly in pain. Yet his energy was undimmed. Every day he arrived on set before anyone else, refusing any special treatment. He often went through 12-hour filming days while quietly enduring chemotherapy in between. He even refused to take strong painkillers during work because he didn't want his performance dulled. Director Michael Dinner later recalled, "Patrick was never late. Never complained. If you didn't know he was sick, you'd never guess it." Behind the camera, his wife, Lisa Nimi, became his anchor. Every morning, she drove him to the studio, helped him manage his medication, and waited while he filmed. When asked why he didn't stop working, Patrick said, "Because when I work, I feel alive." For him, acting wasn't just a job. It was a reason to wake up, a way to keep his mind off death. The media, however, didn't share his sense of dignity. Tabloids ran cruel headlines about his appearance, speculated about his final days, and even declared him dead months before it happened. Patrick addressed those rumors head-on. "They're writing my obituary before I'm gone," he said half-jokingly. But his frustration was visible. He wanted privacy, not pity. Despite everything, The Beast premiered in January 2009 to critical praise. Viewers were amazed by his intensity, unaware that every scene had been filmed between chemo sessions. His performance was raw, powerful, and heartbreaking once audiences realized what he had endured to bring it to life. The show was later canceled after one season, but it became a symbol of Patrick's courage, his final professional triumph before his body could no longer keep up. By that time, his weight had dropped dramatically. He could barely keep food down, and every breath became an effort. Still, he kept pushing forward. "I'm not afraid of dying," he told an interviewer. "I'm afraid of leaving the one I love behind." For more than 3 decades, Lisa Niami had been the quiet force beside Patrick Swayze long before fame, long before the sickness. They met when she was just 14, a shy student at his mother's dance school in Houston, and Patrick was the young instructor who noticed her potential. They fell in love a few years later, married in 1975, and built a life that fame never managed to corrupt. Through every film, every scandal, and every success, Lisa remained constant. When cancer entered their lives in 2008, that devotion became something sacred. Lisa was not just a wife. She was his nurse, his protector, and his voice when he no longer had the strength to speak. Every morning began with the same gentle ritual, checking his temperature, preparing his medication, and helping him move when the pain was too severe. She wrote in her memoir Worth Fighting For that they lived each day as if it were the last, but they never said it out loud. Their home in Los Angeles became a sanctuary of silence and resilience. They read together, listened to music, and watched the sunsets over their ranch. Patrick often told her that the ranch, with its open fields and horses, was the only place where he didn't feel like a celebrity, only a man. "When I'm here," he once said, "I'm not a star. I'm just me." Friends who visited during his final months were astonished by how peaceful the house felt. Lisa rarely left his side, even sleeping beside him when he was too weak to move. In the evenings, she would talk to him softly, reading books aloud or playing their favorite classical records. Though Patrick was visibly fading, their bond never wavered. They had once dreamed of having children, but after a miscarriage years earlier, they chose to see their marriage itself as their legacy. "We don't need kids to be a family," Patrick once said. "We're everything to each other." That truth became painfully real in his final year. While his body surrendered, their love only deepened, turning into something unshakable, something that not even death could erase. By the spring of 2009, Patrick Swayze's health had entered its most fragile stage. The treatments that had once seemed hopeful were no longer working. The cancer had spread to his liver, and doctors told him the truth: there was nothing more they could do. For most people, that kind of news would be unbearable. But Patrick handled it with the same quiet strength that had defined him all his life. He chose to spend what time remained at home, surrounded by peace, away from the noise of Hollywood. His wife, Lisa, documented those days in detail. Every morning she would write down his temperature, what he ate, and even his moods. It was her way of holding on, of turning pain into purpose. "He never complained," she later wrote. "Even when the pain was obvious, he tried to comfort me instead." Patrick spent much of his time reading, listening to music, or sitting in silence near the window overlooking their ranch. Friends who visited said he radiated calm, a kind of acceptance that came only from a man who had made peace with his life. Still, there were moments of struggle. In January 2009, he was hospitalized with pneumonia, a dangerous complication of chemotherapy. Many thought it was the end, but Patrick surprised everyone by recovering and returning home just a week later. He wanted to fight to the very last moment. Lisa said he wasn't ready to let go of life. Not yet. When the pain became unbearable, Lisa was the one who gave him his medicine, fed him, and held his hand when he trembled. She refused to leave his side, even when exhaustion set in. Their home, once filled with laughter and the sound of horses outside, grew quieter each day. Yet it was never a place of despair. It was a place of love, of two people holding on to each other against the inevitable. By early September, Patrick's condition worsened. He could no longer stand on his own, and his speech came in whispers. But even then, he looked at Lisa and smiled. It was the kind of smile that said everything words could not. The afternoon of September 14, 2009, was quiet, the kind of stillness that feels like the world is holding its breath. Patrick Swayze lay in his bed at home in Los Angeles, the same place where he had spent so many peaceful days with Lisa. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, and in that gentle silence, time seemed to slow down. His breathing had become shallow, his eyes half closed, but there was no fear in them, only calm. Lisa sat beside him, holding his hand, just as she had done every single day of his illness. In her memoir Worth Fighting For, she wrote that Patrick had become too weak to speak much. But at one point, she leaned in close and whispered, "I love you." For a brief moment, his lips moved and he whispered back, "I love you." Those were the last words Patrick Swayze ever spoke. It was simple, unadorned, but it was everything. A lifetime of struggle, triumph, fame, and pain all condensed into 3 words. Lisa said she knew in that moment that he was at peace. A few minutes later, Patrick took his final breath. He was 57 years old. There were no reporters, no flashing cameras, no final performance, just 2 people who had loved each other for nearly 35 years. Lisa stayed by his side long after his heart stopped, resting her head on his shoulder and whispering the words again and again. "I love you," she later wrote. "Even after he was gone, I kept talking to him because part of me refused to believe he wasn't still listening." Patrick Swayze's death was confirmed hours later in a brief statement from his publicist. There was no public funeral, no grand farewell, only a private memorial attended by family and close friends. But news of his passing sent a wave of grief across the world. Fans gathered at his Dirty Dancing filming locations, lighting candles and leaving notes that read, "Nobody puts Patrick in the corner." It wasn't just the loss of an actor. It was the loss of a man who lived and died with grace. In the years that followed Patrick Swayze's passing, his name never faded. It only grew stronger. For millions of fans, he wasn't just a movie star. He was a symbol of discipline, humility, and the courage to face death with dignity. His performances in Dirty Dancing, Ghost, Point Break, and Roadhouse continued to resonate across generations, each film serving as a reminder of the man who gave every role a piece of his soul. Not long after his death, Lisa and I published the memoir Worth Fighting For in 2012, detailing their love story and the without second.